Well, today we're welcoming Kate Christensen. Hi, Kate.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
You've just released your eighth book, is that right?
It's my eighth,
Uh,
no, my 10th book.
your 10th book. Well, I realize you have the two food memoirs, but okay. But this book that we're talking about today is Welcome Home, Stranger. And on the very first page of the novel, Rachel, your main character, says, "What do you do when your mother dies?" So, Kate, how do you answer that?
You get on a plane and go home.
Okay. Well, once she gets there, tell us a little bit about who she meets and what condition the family is in.
I love starting with this question. That this gets the book off with a bang. This is a family. This is a family of two sisters and a mother. Basically, it's three. It's a family of three. A family of origin of three. And Rachel's the older of two sisters, and she and her sister Celeste, her younger sister, have been at odds with each other probably for most of their lives. And Rachel doesn't understand why. So the book opens with that question, this person she loves with every cell in her body, yet can't seem to get along with, who always seems angry at her. So we start the novel with their very complicated mother having just died, and Rachel, who's a climate scientist, and I mean, a climate journalist, has been interviewing scientists in the Arctic and writing a piece about ice. And she herself is a bit of a frozen ice core when the novel opens. She doesn't allow herself any pleasures. She won't let herself drink. She won't let herself eat because she knows too much about the toxins in food. She's
Yeah.
single, as she describes herself, she's single, menopausal, childless, and a workaholic. And so she's on a plane on her way back to Portland, Maine, to essentially put her mother to rest with her younger sister Celeste. And so that's the inciting incident of the novel, which I copied straight from Camus' The Stranger, and also the existential sort of question at the heart of the book. I think it's an existential novel about climate change, about menopause, about change in all its forms, about sort of who is a woman when she is no longer fertile, and this sort of shifting of identity that Rachel is going through also because she is also menopausal. So it's about a lot of things, and I tried to get them all into the first page so that, as I tell my students, every novel at the beginning, it needs to be like the Big Bang. The first page, the first chapter needs to contain all of the material of the novel. So you
Yes.
set it in motion out of nowhere, boom. So that's what I was going for with that.
Oh,
It's a very,
wait, yeah, you did that. You did that. What are some of the emotions that Rachel goes through?
oh gosh, where even to start with her emotions? She is, well, I think as she describes her family, her mother and sister are kooks. Her sister is a kook. Her mother was a kook. She herself denies the fact that she is a kook, just like them, but she knows she is. And so what she tries to do is say only things that are true. She has a very, very analytical brain, very, very kind of allied with science and journalism and facts. And so these volcanic emotions that she feels, as she describes them, are sort of suppressed, but they're all there. And I think the feelings she's going through throughout the book range from incredible confusion to startling clarity. It's a series of sort of coming to the awareness of the truth of her situation in life now as things are taken away from her one by one, almost in a Job-like manner. And I did that very deliberately.
And she's also carries a lot of guilt, I suppose, for not being there when her mother dies, right?
Oh, yes, and thank you for bringing that up. That's sort of the central knot between her and her sister when her plane lands, and there's her sister waiting for her. And the unspoken question in the air is, where were you? Where have you been? When I was taking care of mom, when she was sick and dying, you weren't here. And Rachel can't, it's such a big question, and the answer we don't know at the beginning of the book why she wasn't there. And we might judge her a bit for why wasn't she there when her mother was dying? Who doesn't go home when your mother, you don't wait until your mother dies to go home. That's the other thing. What do you do when your mother is dying? You get on a plane and go home.
That's right. That's
So
right.
the way the novel opens with this question, like, where was Rachel? Why wasn't she there? Why wasn't she helping her sister? And I think this is something that happens between siblings a lot, with parents who are getting older, who are getting sick, who are dying. There's often a sibling who takes on most of the care. And this actually isn't true in my family, but because thank God, well, my father is gone, but my mother is alive and well. But it's happening, I think, in families of people I see around me. There, especially when there are two sisters, and one of them takes on the lion's share. She sort of shoulders. She's maybe it doesn't even matter if she's closer to the mother. Usually, it's the one who's not closer. Um,
Mhm.
but I really wanted to write about that, seeing that happen as I was getting older and my friends were getting older, seeing a sort of shift in siblings becoming caretakers of parents, and the tensions that this sets up. This is what really interests me as a novelist. It's the question of why wouldn't you go home when your mother is sick and dying? That to me is worthy of a novel, because what
Mhm.
exactly is going on between this mother and daughter? And
Well,
so,
and then there are so many complications, such as David.
David, oh, he's trouble.
And I noticed that in a lot of your novels, the men are scoundrels to be pushed away. Why?
Yeah,
Why?
thank you for bringing that up. I was noticing that too. And I didn't do it on purpose. I think that, well, my father was a scoundrel, and and I loved him dearly, but he was a mysterious kind of absent figure in my life. And so I feel like a lot of my writing has been a way to understand my father in one way or another. And these, yes, these scoundrels that I've conjured from my imagination, that to me, part of it also is that I myself have an internal scoundrel, and I've always been tried to be a good girl. But letting loose my internal scoundrel is no end of fun in a novel. And I feel like another place where I can explore another life or another alter ego that I haven't let myself live.
But you say, I've read that a lot of this material does come from your own life experiences, and that you spent like 5 years writing this, and during the dark COVID period.
Yeah.
What,
I
how did
start
you get through that?
well, I always say that writing saves me, and this is why this is my 10th book. It's not that I feel compelled to write when things are tough. I feel like that is my way through. And I started this novel in a dark time for the country, a dark time for me personally. We were in the north, and in Maine, my husband and I with our dogs, and the north went into lockdown. And during COVID, we were it was sort of a faux pas to sort of socialize up there. And so my husband and I went into quarantine in a farmhouse in remote New Hampshire that belongs to his family, and sort of didn't see anyone except each other. Luckily, we love each other's company because
He's
um,
not a scoundrel.
not at all. Thank God. No, he's the opposite of a scoundrel. No, I love him dearly, and I lucked out. So that part of it wasn't dark, but what was going on in my own head was dark, and I was confronting a couple of really deep, painful ruptures in relationships in my life. One of which was with my mother, and I was sort of sifting through my history with my mother and thinking, you know what, you know facing my demons because I had also just gotten sober. So let me tell you, as a lifelong drinker, to go through quarantine, COVID, sober was not easy. But I did it
Oh,
because I needed to do it, and it was
good
good.
for you, though. Yeah.
So this novel came out of a very sort of and also there was the fact of menopause, and so I was wondering sort of who am I? Just like Rachel, I gave her that question. Who am I as a woman in this new phase in my life? And how am I going to embrace it instead of fighting it? How am I going to be just sort of experience this new phase without sort of criticizing it and being afraid of it? And no one really talks about the upside of menopause, but there is an upside. There are a few upsides, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. There are.
I feel really clear in my head, and I also feel like I'm not dependent on my looks in a way that I was when I was younger. And I find myself the observer now. And it's like Rachel has a conversation with her old nemesis, new friend, Suzanne, about menopause and how being invisible is it's a disadvantage in some ways, but in other ways it's a superpower. And and you get to observe, you get to be the one who observes instead of the one who's watched. And so there was definitely that feeling, but I feel like I've completely gotten away from your question.
No, no, no. I think that's good. You said also you write, everyone contains a manner of secret selves. How do you feel about that?
I think that's so well. Actually, I don't know if I'm qualified to say that because I don't know how anyone else feels about this, but I think I do. And I think that a lot of novelists talk about this feeling of the for me, writing a novel is this way to explore things that I wouldn't want to explore in my life because it's not socially acceptable. And so I am really interested in the drama of characters who want something very badly or who rebel against conventional expectations or, like you said, scoundrels.
Yeah.
I've especially let my male narrators, but also the women in my books, sort of I set something in motion because I myself am curious to find out what happens when you go off the rails like that.
So you don't really know when you're writing? I mean, you don't write toward an objective?
I
You let
I
it
write
happen?
I write with a question in mind, and I don't know the answer yet when I start the book. And the curiosity about the question is what drives the book. And well, I think this book is a departure for me. It's a new kind of novel for me to write. But in the past, I've set loose these mischievous kind of, I mean, I like calling them losers very fondly, but scoundrels and sort of drinkers and people with an itch for trouble, and I like setting them loose in a book and seeing what happens. That's been my MO. And then I wrote The Great Man, which is very consciously constructed, and I used A Midsummer Night's Dream as my model, this sort of classic romance of everyone at odds through the book and then pairing off at the end. And it was a delight to write because it was so different from my earlier books. But I also felt that I was constructing a multitude of voices and a multitude of characters and a big sort of cast like a play. And but I feel like in this novel, and I want to get back to your question about writing it in a dark time and it wasn't working. Um, I felt like I couldn't, because I myself, sorry, I have to take a sip. I think I'm allergic to everything. I felt like I myself this is during COVID quarantine. This is, during wrestling soberly with all my demons. Um, I couldn't bear to make enough bad things happen to Rachel. And the reason the book wasn't working was that I kept solving her problems. I kept giving her the answer because she's so smart and pragmatic. I thought, well, yeah, she'll figure this out. But the novel just ran out of steam. It was so boring. And I have a wonderful writing group in Maine, and they suffered with me through about 3 drafts of this thing. And all of them kept saying, "Yeah, it's great at the beginning. It's an amazing beginning, but it's just so boring in the second half." Was that I gave Rachel this whole life that it was too soon to give her. She hadn't struggled enough. She hadn't gone through what I needed her to go through dramatically to arrive at the ending where she arrives now, which is just the beginning of what that is going to be. But I wrote that entire thing way past the ending of the novel. I wrote like a year and a half past that.
Wow.
Yeah, no. So at a certain point, after we came out of quarantine and moved here to Taos, New Mexico, and left Maine, which broke my heart, but it turned out to be a great move. My husband's a screenwriter. He needed to be closer to LA. And we have found just wonderful friends here, and I'm glad we moved here. But moving here also took me out of Maine, where the novel is set. And there's something about geography when you're writing a novel. It's very interesting to be in the place you're writing about versus not being in the place you're writing about. And looking back on it in sort of nostalgic hindsight, I think leaving the setting of the novel and coming to New Mexico, I started a new draft, and all of a sudden I had the courage to give Rachel to make, instead of generating her own trouble as my earlier characters do, which I think is a comic, it's a time-honored comic device of just, setting loose a misanthrope or a scoundrel. This time I took a really good sort of hardworking working class Maine woman who's left to make something of herself and has succeeded after a childhood of neglect, and she has a mentally ill mother who's an alcoholic. All this stuff that she's dealt with, she comes back and things really start to fall apart for her. And what does she do? Does she have the internal sort of equipment to face it all? And that became the question of the book. What do you do when you lose everything? Because that was my question in my life. I felt that I was losing a lot. And what do you do when you lose everything? I wanted to know, and I wanted Rachel to tell me. And in order to find the answer, I had to stop giving her the solutions as the novel. I had to force her to metaphorically and literally sort of get lost in the woods in that sort of Dante midlife sort of metaphorical. What do you do when you come out of the thicket? And where are you?
This book seems to me to be far more character driven than action driven. Do you think that, you write in vivid detail, do you think that readers are turning back to more literary stories these days?
Oh, I hope so.
I do too.
Thank you.
Versus genre,
Oh, yeah. I feel like, well, I often think I don't really know. I feel like genre is very story driven and often plot driven. So your question is, the plot of this novel it's very interior. We
Right.
very much stay in her point of view and in her head. And I um when you write about a woman, it's hard not to set up certain expectations in some readers' minds. And I feel like this is why I've written male narrators, because I've always felt that the expectations people bring to a male narrator are different from expectations that they bring to a female narrator. And if I write about women, I run the risk of raising expectations that this is going to be a feel-good sort of, she triumphs over everything, and it's all really clear. And what I'm after is a more ambiguous, literary, as you say, if I can use that word, a more sort of internal. It's not a transformation, but it's a sort of reckoning. And what I want is it's a novel about adapting to changed circumstances, and this is an internal thing for Rachel, and I mean, your question is, are readers turning back to a more literary? I don't know. Some readers never turned away from that. If I can speak for myself, I'm always really interested in voice-driven interior novels about people who undergo a transition or who are in crisis or who have to struggle with something. Sort of the person against the world in a way. It never gets old for me. So
Did that approach make it more difficult to sell to a publisher?
here, well,
Or how did that go?
that's actually a really interesting story. I wrote a detective novel because this novel wasn't working, so I put it away, still in New Hampshire in the farmhouse in quarantine. I put it away and I wrote a detective novel just for fun because I've read thousands of detective novels. It's my favorite genre. I find it comforting when I'm struggling. Just like food writing, I find detective novels to be orderly, the detective, there's a murder, excellent, a murder. So much, and it's not a real murder, it's a fictional murder. And then there's a detective who goes in search of the facts and solves the crime, and has to sort of meld with the murderer in a way, which I've always thought was interesting. The detective and the murderers and that relationship between them, almost like a twinning. You have to think like a murderer to catch a murderer, and the detective yet tries to stay on the side of the law. So I wrote a detective novel. I invented a fictional detective of my own named Joe Perez, and it's set in Arizona, where I'm from. And I just had a ball with it. I just, and so my agent read it and said, "Hey, why don't I go out with it?" And at the time, it was still not really finished. And so a lot of editors passed on it. But then he sent it to Sarah Nelson at Harper, um, who read it and said, detective novels aren't really my cup of tea, but do you have anything literary? You've been working on anything literary? I had just finished the day before, this is true. The day before, I had finished the draft of Welcome Home Stranger that finally was working. So
Wow.
I just sent it to her, and
Wow.
she bought it
Of
and the detective
course.
novel. So I suppose, um, and the detective
Well,
novel is coming out this summer under a pseudonym. And I'm writing another one. I just feel like this dark hard time I went through sort of resulted in two books, and other books that I have that I want to write. And I have to say again about quitting drinking and becoming sober, which I'm coming up on 5 years. Um, and when I say I was a drinker, I was a drinker. And I loved it. But it's so much better now for me not to drink, not to open a bottle of wine every night. And uh, um, but I feel like this clarity that comes once the sort of I talk about menopause like it's adolescence in reverse. And you go through adolescence at the beginning of your life, and then you have all these 40 years or something of being fertile, and all that means, and the moods, and et cetera. Then you go through menopause and you come out the other end, and I felt like I haven't felt this clear in my brain since I was 11.
yeah, good for you. I love your honesty about yourself. I love that. Um, you're a Penn Faulkner Award winner among several other really top awards, and you've taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop and for several MFA programs. What advice can you give to a writer who's trying to improve one's craft? And how many times would you advise an unpublished author to query an agent or query agents before giving up?
Well, let's see. One of the pieces of advice I always give students is never give up.
Right.
Don't give up. Write every day is the other one. And I think this is something that beginning writers don't know yet. But the only way to write, the only way to be a writer is to be a writer. And if you don't write every day, your work sort of cools off, and you have to sort of, it takes me 3 days to get back in. If I leave a work, something I'm working on for too long, I have to, it's so hard to get back in. So my advice is write every day. Also, when you're stuck, I really don't believe in writer's block. I think what's happening is that you're scared. And write down what you're scared of writing. Write down all the things you don't want to write, the things you don't want to say. Make yourself write them down. Look at the piece of paper, you've written them, it's done, the worst has happened, and you're still there. And I find that this can be really helpful when I can't keep going. Um, and
That's awesome. Yeah.
I think it's hard for beginning writers to sort of just allow themselves to write badly. Also, you have this expectation that you're going to be great and that everything needs to sound like it's a published classic masterpiece. And a lot of writing, as I've just said, and I am really honest about all of it, the whole process, because I don't want any illusions about the writing life. I it's difficult. It's never easy. This was my 10th book, and it was just as hard as my first book. So let yourself know that it's hard and that you will write badly. But if you write every day and don't give up, and in terms of querying agents, yeah, that's a tough one. Agents are tough. You need to find the person who believes in your work and who can represent you in the world. And if it takes 50 tries to find that person, keep trying. There are a lot of agents out there, and sometimes it takes a long time to find the one.
I love that. Yeah, thank you very much, Kate Christensen, author of Welcome Home Stranger, just out from HarperCollins. Thank you so much.